A scuffed leather portfolio arrived at the Philadelphia Historical Society, containing materials from an elderly woman's grandmother's attic. Among ordinary receipts and brittle letters sat an unremarkable family photograph from 1868. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, researching post-Civil War African-American history, nearly set it aside with barely a glance. She had examined hundreds of similar Victorian portraits over the years. Something made her pause. 5 figures stood in the frame, a broad-shouldered man in a pressed suit, his hand resting protectively on a woman's shoulder. She wore an elegant dress with delicate lace collar. 3 children stood in front, dressed in Sunday clothes. The Philadelphia studio backdrop displayed painted columns and draped fabric. The artificial grandeur meant to bestow dignity on ordinary lives. Sarah lifted her magnifying glass and studied their faces. The father's expression carried restrained pride. The mother's eyes held warmth despite the era's prohibition against smiling. The 2 older children, perhaps 10 and 8, stared ahead with Victorian photography's required intensity. Only the youngest broke the pattern. The smallest boy, no more than 6, wasn't looking at the camera. His gaze fixed somewhere beyond the frame, off to the right, with an expression Sarah couldn't immediately define. Not fear, not simple curiosity. It seemed deliberate, aware, as though he chose to look elsewhere. She murmured to the empty archive room and adjusted the desk lamp, angling light across the photograph surface. The image was remarkably well preserved. In the lower corner, barely visible, was the studio imprint, Whitman & Sons Photography, Race Street, Philadelphia. Why would a child look away during such a costly, important sitting? Families saved for months to afford studio portraits. Every detail mattered. Parents coached their children repeatedly to stand still, to behave properly, to present the family as respectable and dignified. Yet this boy looked somewhere else entirely, as if something outside the frame demanded his attention. She shifted the magnifying glass slowly across the image. The painted backdrop showed false marble and classical architecture, symbols of refinement. But behind the family, partially hidden by draped fabric, something reflected light oddly. Sarah leaned closer. Was it a mirror? Her breath caught. In the 1860s, photographers sometimes used mirrors to manipulate light or add depth. But this reflection appeared accidental, almost careless. A narrow strip of silvered glass peeked from behind the curtain, catching just enough light to reveal a blurred, ghost-like figure, someone who didn't belong in the scene. Her hands trembled as she reached for the digital scanner. This photograph was concealing something intentional, and the little boy, with his carefully averted gaze, might have been the only one brave enough, or perhaps innocent enough, to look directly at the truth, rather than the camera. The following morning, Sarah tracked down the donation records. The elderly woman who brought the portfolio was Dorothy Peterson. After 3 rings, a warm but tired voice answered. Sarah identified herself and explained she was calling about the donated materials. Dorothy confirmed most of it was just old papers. Sarah hesitated before continuing, asking about a family portrait from 1868. A pause followed, then a quiet intake of breath. That would be her great-great-grandparents, Dorothy explained, the Williams family. Thomas and Martha Williams and their children, Thomas Jr., Clara, and little Samuel. Samuel was the youngest, her great-grandfather. He lived to 93, sharp as a tack until the end, and told wonderful stories about old Philadelphia. Sarah's pulse quickened. She asked if Dorothy would meet, explaining she believed there might be something historically important about the photograph. Another pause followed, longer this time. When Dorothy spoke again, her tone had changed, quieter and more guarded. She asked what Sarah had found. Sarah chose her words carefully, explaining she wasn't certain yet, but thought Dorothy's great-grandfather may have witnessed something significant, something deliberately hidden. Silence stretched between them. Dorothy said at last that he once told her the photograph was taken on the most dangerous day of his life. She was young and thought he was exaggerating, but he was serious. He said that picture proved his family were heroes, even though no one could ever know. Sarah asked if he ever explained what he meant. No, Dorothy replied softly. He died 2 weeks later. She never had the chance to ask. She'd wondered about it ever since. That photograph sat in her grandmother's drawer for 70 years, then in hers for another 30. She brought it to the Historical Society hoping someone might finally understand it. They arranged to meet the next afternoon. Sarah spent the rest of the day researching the Williams family through census data, city directories and property records. Thomas Williams was listed as a blacksmith with a shop on South Street. Martha Williams appeared as a seamstress. They owned their home, an uncommon achievement for a black family in that era. School records showed that in 1868, Thomas Jr. and Clara attended the Institute for Colored Youth, one of the few institutions offering advanced education to black children. Samuel, at 6, would have remained at home. A newspaper clipping from July 1868 made Sarah's hand freeze above the archive table. The headline read, "Local Negro family questioned in suspected harboring case, no charges fill." The article was brief, dismissive, and steeped in casual racism. Authorities had investigated the Williams household following anonymous reports of suspicious activity, but claimed to have found no evidence. The family insisted they were honest workers, and the matter was dropped. Harboring in 1868. Slavery had been abolished 3 years earlier. The war was over. Freedom was law. Yet Sarah knew what many preferred to forget. In remote areas of the South, under corrupt local systems, people were still being held illegally in bondage. The Underground Railroad had not simply ended. It couldn't. The same networks that helped people escape before the war continued quietly afterward, guiding men, women, and children toward true freedom, often toward Canada, where American law held no power. The Williams family, Sarah realized with growing certainty, had been part of that network, and somehow, impossibly, they had recorded it in a photograph. The next morning, Sarah stood on Race Street in Philadelphia's historic district, gazing up at the building that once housed Whitman and Sons Photography. It was now a cafe with exposed brick and industrial lights, but the original structure remained. Tall windows designed to capture sunlight, high ceilings to accommodate backdrops. Inside, she ordered coffee and casually asked the barista about the building's past. He said it had been like 6 different businesses, clearly uninterested. But yeah, it was a photography studio way back. There's some old stuff in the basement. The owner keeps it for preservation reasons. $20 and a friendly smile earned her access. The basement was cramped and dusty, filled with stacked chairs and restaurant supplies. In the far corner behind broken furniture, she found 3 wooden crates marked with faded ink, Whitman Archives handle with care. Her hands shook as she opened the first crate. Inside were glass plate negatives, hundreds of them wrapped in yellowed newspaper, each preserving a moment from the 1860s and 1870s. Studio portraits, merchants, families, children in elaborate clothing, a visual record of post-war Philadelphia. The second crate contained ledgers. Business records listed every sitting, every client, every payment. Sarah turned pages carefully until she reached July 1868. There it was, written in elegant script, July 23, 1868. Williams family full portrait sitting payment, $4.50 special arrangement evening session. She frowned. Evening sessions were unusual. Studios relied on daylight streaming through tall windows. Darkness meant no natural light, no standard portraits. Evening meant empty streets, privacy, secrecy. Sarah felt her thoughts racing as she leaned closer to the page and continued digging through the ledger. Most entries were simple and predictable, names, dates, fees paid, yet scattered among them, perhaps once or twice each month, Sarah noticed other evening sessions marked the same way, special arrangement. Everyone involved African-American families, their surnames familiar from her previous research. Her coffee sat untouched as she began cross-referencing names with historical records, a slow unease building in her chest. The Patterson family stood out immediately. Father's name appeared in abolitionist society documents, identified as a conductor. The Morris family followed, their homes searched twice by authorities in the years after the war for suspected contraband. The Hughes family came next, the mother having testified in a freedom suit that helped prove a woman was being held illegally in Maryland. These were not random portrait sittings. This was documentation, evidence, a visual archive of the people who formed Philadelphia's quiet continuation of the Underground Railroad. Sarah leaned back, trying to absorb it all. Why would anyone risk creating permanent proof of illegal activity? Why invite danger in such a tangible form? The answer came slowly, settling into place with painful clarity. Because photographs were proof of another kind. In a world where black families were dismissed, their words doubted, and their humanity questioned in courtrooms, a photograph carried different weight. A photograph could not argue or be silenced. It showed existence. It showed property ownership, stability, dignity, family, and legitimacy. These portraits were shields. If accused, if dragged into court, these families could point to undeniable evidence that they were respectable citizens, not criminals. But that wasn't all they were preserving. They were also documenting something else, Sarah realized. Something hidden deliberately within plain sight. She returned to the Williams family entry and noticed a faint notation in the margin she had nearly overlooked. Arrived, usual precautions, RM. The letters were light, hurried, almost secretive. She flipped through other evening sessions. The same initials appeared again and again, irregular but consistent. Robert Mitchell, Richard Moore. Then, several pages later, the initials appeared in different handwriting. Likely an assistant's note. RM departed successfully via back entrance. Package secured. Sarah exhaled slowly. Package. The chilling, dehumanizing language often used to describe a human being moved toward freedom. Back at the Historical Society, Sarah placed the Williams photograph beneath the highest resolution scanner available. Modern digital technology could extract what the naked eye never could, capturing minute shadows and enhancing subtle details without damaging the original image. She focused on the section that had first unsettled her, the narrow strip of mirror barely visible behind the draped backdrop, at 400 PE. Scent magnification, the reflection remained vague. At 800%, shapes began to form. At 1200%, Sarah's heart nearly stopped. There was undeniably someone there. A figure standing partially hidden behind the photographer's space, positioned deliberately outside the main frame. The angle ruled out the photographer himself. This person stood off to the side, swallowed by shadow, intentionally unseen. Dark clothing, a suggestion of a face, hands clasped tightly at chest level, a posture that conveyed tension, fear, and fragile hope all at once. Sarah carefully adjusted contrast and brightness, enhancing the image without distorting it. Historical photograph analysis demanded restraint. Push too hard and you created illusions, but handled with care, the truth emerged. The figure sharpened slightly. A woman, Sarah thought, though certainty remained impossible, young, perhaps in her early 20s. Her dress was plain, rougher fabric, no lace, nothing ornamental. The clothes of someone with little means, even blurred and ghost-like in the mirror's accidental reflection. Her expression was unmistakable, desperate hope. Sarah sat back as the story assembled itself piece by piece. The Williams family had booked an evening session when the studio would be empty, the street dark and entrances unobserved. They dressed in their finest clothes and posed for a portrait that proclaimed respectability. And while they stood there, someone else remained hidden, someone who could not appear in the photograph, could not be officially recorded, could not risk being seen, someone who waited in the shadows while the family created an alibi. Little Samuel had not been distracted or disobedient when he looked away from the camera. He had been looking at her, at the woman his family was protecting, at the person who would soon be moved farther along the network tour. True freedom. In that moment of childhood honesty, he focused on the most important person in the room, even though no one else was supposed to know she was there. Sarah pulled up the newspaper clipping again. The investigation into the Williams household had occurred in July 1868. The photograph was dated July 23, 1868. The timing was too precise to ignore. Their home had been searched, questions asked, suspicion cast. Days later, they created a permanent image proving they were respectable, law-abiding citizens. The photograph functioned as an alibi, and hidden within its reflection, it also served as a confession. Sarah zoomed in on Samuel's face. His gaze was focused, intentional. At the corner of his mouth was the faintest hint of something not quite a smile, a look of complicity, of knowing. This child had been keeping watch, standing perfectly still for the camera while silently making sure the hidden woman was safe. Dorothy Peterson arrived the next afternoon carrying a worn cloth bag. At 78, she had silver hair and eyes that missed very little. She studied Sarah carefully before sitting down and simply said to show her what she'd found. Sarah laid everything out on the table: the original photograph, the magnified mirror reflection, the studio ledger entry, the newspaper clipping. Dorothy's hand flew to her mouth. She whispered that she really was there. Sarah asked gently if Dorothy had known. Dorothy shook her head. She thought it was just a story, something her great-grandfather said when he was old, when his memory might have been failing. Her voice faltered as she touched the photograph with trembling fingers. He told her they helped people, that before he started school his house was a stop on the railroad, but she thought he meant before the war. She thought he was confused about the dates. The railroad didn't stop with abolition, Sarah explained softly. It couldn't. In some places, people were still being held illegally. The work continued, but in deeper secrecy. Dorothy nodded, tears filling her eyes. He remembered one woman, she said, just one. He said she stayed in their attic for 3 days. He would sneak up to bring her food. He said she sang to him once very quietly. She hummed a few notes, an old spiritual heavy with sorrow and hope. He was 6, Dorothy continued, and he knew that if anyone found out, his whole family would be ruined. His father could lose his shop, his mother could be arrested, they could lose their home. But he also knew it was right. Sarah slid another document forward, a passenger manifest from a ship that left Philadelphia for Nova Scotia in late July 1868. She said she thought she found her, a woman listed only as RM. The passage was paid by a private charity. Dorothy whispered, asking if she made it. The ship arrived safely, Sarah replied. After that, she disappears. No records. That usually means success. They sat quietly, studying the photograph once more. A dignified family standing proudly, and hidden in the reflection, undeniable proof of courage. The picture was taken right after the investigation, Sarah said. Dorothy's family was sending a message and hiding the truth in plain sight. Dorothy smiled through her tears. That sounds like her great-grandfather, she said. He used to say the bravest people look ordinary. She reached into her bag and removed an old leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. She brought this, she said. It was Samuel's. He had written in it later in his life, mostly during the 1920s and 1930s. Dorothy admitted she hadn't opened it in many years, but she felt there might be something inside that could help. Sarah accepted the journal with reverence. On the first page, written in careful, deliberate handwriting, Samuel Williams had pen. Add a single line for my grandchildren, so they will know what their family stood for. That evening, Sarah read Samuel Williams's journal by lamplight in her apartment, unwilling to expose the fragile pages to harsh fluorescent lighting. His handwriting was elegant and steady, the script of an educated man reflecting on a life that stretched from the shadow of slavery into the Jazz Age. Many entries were ordinary, notes about family dinners, shop accounts, church services, neighborhood events. But scattered throughout were passages that made Sarah's breath catch. One entry was dated August 12, 1923. It marked 55 years since the photograph. He found himself thinking of her again as he did every July. He was only 6, but remembered her face as clearly as he remembered his own children's. She was terrified and brave in equal measure. His mother told him years later that she walked nearly 90 miles to reach Philadelphia, following stars and instructions whispered by people whose names she never learned. She stayed 3 days in their attic. He crept up the stairs with bread and water, pretending he was a soldier on a secret mission. She thanked him once and called him her little guardian. He didn't fully understand what they were doing then, but he knew it mattered. He knew they were hiding her from people who wanted to hurt her. And he knew that if he told anyone, not even his closest friend at school, his whole family would be destroyed. Sarah turned the pages with care and found another entry years later, dated November 3, 1931. A young man came to his shop asking about the years right after the war. He said he was a historian, trying to understand how the railroad operated in Philadelphia. Samuel told him what everyone tells historians, that it was heroic work done by brave people, and that most details are lost to time. He did not mention the photograph. He did not mention R.M., Rachel Martin, though he didn't learn her full name until 1889, when she wrote to his mother from Toronto. By then he was a grown man with children of his own. Reading her letter and knowing she had made it, knowing she had built a life in freedom, made him cry harder than he had since childhood. His mother saved the letter. He hoped his daughter saved it too. Someday, when enough time had passed that truth no longer endangered anyone, he hoped someone would find it and understand what ordinary families did in extraordinary times. Rachel Martin. Sarah wrote the name down, her hand trembling slightly. A full identity to attach to the ghostly figure hidden in the mirror's reflection. She continued reading, turning to another entry dated July 23, 1935. 67 years ago that day, they took that photograph. He was 81 now, the last living soul who stood in that room. Thomas Jr. died in 1918, Clara in 1929. Mother and father had been gone for decades. The photographer, Mr. Whitman's son, died last year. He attended his funeral, and afterward his grandson asked whether he had known his grandfather well. He said only as a customer. But the truth was, Mr. Whitman Jr. was as brave as any of them. He risked his livelihood, his reputation, and his freedom by opening his studio after dark. He looked away when someone extra slipped through the back door. He created portraits that served as alibis while capturing, accidentally or perhaps not, the truth in reflections and shadows. Samuel often wondered if he knew the mirror caught her image. He wondered if he left it there on purpose, a quiet witness for future generations. He would never know, but he liked to think he did. He liked to think that photograph was his way of saying, this happened, these people were heroes, someday when it's safe, someone will see. The final relevant entry was written on L, weeks before Samuel's death in 1961. He told his great-granddaughter Dorothy about the photograph that day. She was 10, bright as summer, and she asked why people looked so serious in old pictures. He told her it wasn't seriousness, it was bravery. He told her that photograph was taken on the most dangerous day of his life, and that it proved his family were heroes, even though no one could ever know. She looked confused and perhaps he rambled, but he wanted her to understand someday. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things, that's what holds the world together, not presidents or generals, but families opening doors in the dark, photographers dimming lights so someone can slip away unseen, 6-year-old boys keeping secrets that could destroy everything they love. That photograph sits in his daughter's drawer now. He hoped it survives. He hoped someone finds it and understands. He hoped the mirror tells its story. Sarah closed the journal gently, tears streaming down her face. Samuel had known. He had hoped. And now, 157 years later, someone finally had seen. Finding Rachel Martin proved more difficult than Sarah expected. The ship manifest confirmed a woman with those initials traveled to Nova Scotia. But Canadian records from the 1860s were incomplete, especially for black refugees who often used assumed names or vanished into communities that protected them from American authorities who sometimes pursued escapees across borders. Sarah contacted colleagues in Toronto, Halifax, and Montreal. She posted inquiries on historical forums and reached out to genealogists specializing in African Canadian history. 3 weeks later, she received an email from Dr. James Robinson, a retired Toronto professor who had spent 40 years documenting black Canadian settlements after the Civil War. He believed he found Rachel Martin, the message read. She went B. Rachel Morrison in Canada, a common practice for safety. Census records showed Rachel Morrison arriving in Toronto in August 1868, approximately 24 years old, from Pennsylvania. She married Frederick Morrison, a carpenter, in 1871. They had 4 children. She died in 1921 at age 77 and is buried in Toronto's Necropolis Cemetery. Attached were scanned documents, a marriage certificate, birth records, a death certificate, and a newspaper clipping from the Toronto Globe dated 1919. It showed an elderly Rachel Morrison being honoured by her church for 50 years of service. The photograph was small and grainy, but Sarah could make out kind eyes and white hair. The caption read that Mrs. Rachel Morrison, beloved member of First Baptist Church, was being honoured for a lifetime of service to new arrivals in Toronto, helping families transition to freedom in Canada. She had spent her life doing for others what had once been done for her. Sarah sat back, overwhelmed. The ghostly figure in the mirror had lived, married, raised children, and transformed terror into decades of compassion. Dr. Robinson's email continued. One of Rachel Morrison's great-granddaughters still lives in Toronto. Her name is Patricia Morrison Chen, a retired schoolteacher. He mentioned Sarah's research to her, and she was very interested in speaking. Sarah contacted Patricia immediately. They arranged a video call for the next evening. Patricia appeared on screen with silver braids, and the same gentle eyes seen in the old photograph. She said to tell her everything as soon as they connected. Her great-grandmother never spoke about her escape, Patricia explained. She told Patricia's grandmother only that angels in Philadelphia saved her life, and that she owed everything to a family whose name she promised never to reveal. Sarah shared the photograph, the enhanced mirror image, and Sam. Wells' journal entries. She explained the evening session and the investigation that had nearly destroyed the Williams family. Patricia wept openly. She kept her promise, Patricia said. She never spoke their names. Even on her deathbed, she said it was too dangerous. She paused, then added that Rachel wrote something. Patricia returned with a small wooden box filled with letters and keepsakes. From it, she withdrew a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. This was pinned inside her Bible, she said. They never understood it. She held it to the camera. In faded ink were 4 lines, July 23, 1868. The day I became free. Thanks to the blacksmith's family and the little boy who watched over me. Sarah's vision blurred. That was Samuel, she whispered. He was 6. He brought her food. He kept her secret. And now we know his name, Patricia said softly. After all these years, we can finally say thank you. With Rachel Martin's identity confirmed and Patricia's permission granted, Sarah returned to the studio ledgers with renewed purpose. If the Williams family and Rachel Martin represented one successful passage, how many others had been quietly documented during those evening sessions? The question haunted Sarah. She spent 2 full months cross-referencing names, dates, and surviving records, following faint trails through census data, city directories, church archives, and forgotten newspaper clippings. Slowly, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. Roughly twice a month between 1866 and 1872, Whitman and Sons Photography had conducted what the ledgers described as special arrangement evening sessions for black families. The language was coded but consistent. Notes such as package secured, departure confirmed, and safe arrival appeared again and again. In total, Sarah identified 17 families who had participated in the network. Using every available record, he traced their stories forward and backward through time. The Patterson family operated a boarding house that doubled as temporary shelter for people passing through. The Hughes family ran a wagon-making business, their carts fitted with false bottoms used to transport people without detection. The Morris family relied on deep ties within Philadelphia's black church network to identify new arrivals who needed help and to quietly pass information along. Every family had taken enormous risks. Each had been investigated at least once by authorities, and each had commissioned formal studio portraits that documented their respectability, legitimacy, and social standing. These images were not just keepsakes. They were protection. Sarah realized they functioned as insurance. If any family member were arrested, these portraits could be presented in court as proof of character. The photographs seemed to say, "Look at us. We are property owners, business people, church-going families. Would people like us commit crimes?" The images spoke in a language the legal system was forced to acknowledge. But another layer of the story emerged as Sarah dug deeper into abolitionist society records. The photographer James Whitman Jr. had not simply looked the other way. He had been an active participant in the network. His father, James Whitman Sr., had been a committed abolitionist before the war, using his studio to create photographs of formerly enslaved people to document their humanity and support legal claims to freedom. After his father's death in 1865, James Whitman Jr. continued the work in silence. Evening sessions provided a safe, discreet environment for families involved in the now illegal but morally necessary work of helping people still trapped in de facto slavery. The studio's basement entrance opened onto an alley connected to a maze of passageways between buildings. Ants of the original Underground Railroad infrastructure. People could slip inside unseen, wait in the studio's back room while a family posed for their portrait, and then leave quietly once the streets emptied. Whitman documented each passage in his personal journal, which Sarah eventually uncovered in the archives. His entries were brief but revealing. Evening session, Williams family, RM departed safely. Fourth successful passage this month, father would be proud. Authorities asking questions about evening activities, increased caution required, but the work continues. Portrait of Hughes family, infant included. First baby born free in Canada to a family we assisted, small victories. James Whitman Jr. died in 1934, having operated his studio until 1890 before retiring. His obituary mentioned nothing of his role in the post-war Underground Railroad. He carried the secret to his grave, protecting the families he had helped, even in death. Yet the photographs endured, each one a quiet testament to ordinary people doing extraordinary things, hiding truth in shadows and reflections, waiting patiently to be seen. 6 months after discovering the reflection in the Williams family photograph, Sarah stood in the main gallery of the Philadelphia Historical Society, watching visitors move through the exhibition she had curated. Hidden in plain sight, Philadelphia's post-war Underground Railroad filled 2 rooms and told the story she had uncovered piece by piece. The Williams family photograph occupied the center of the exhibition. It was displayed alongside side-by-side comparisons showing the original image and the enhanced version that revealed Rachel Martin's reflection. Surrounding it were 16 other family portraits from evening sessions, each accompanied by detailed explanations of who the families were, the risks they took, and what became of the people they help. Interactive displays allowed visitors to zoom in on the photographs, searching for hidden details of their own. Video interviews with descendants played on a continuous loop. Dorothy Peterson, Patricia Morrison Chen, others whose ancestors had been part of the network, but it was Samuel Williams's journal that drew the longest lines, displayed in a climate-controlled case. It was open to the page where he wrote about being Rachel's little guardian. The words connected past and present so powerfully that visitors often stood silently reading, their faces reflecting wonder, sorrow, and pride. Dorothy and Patricia stood together near the Williams photograph, meeting in person for the first time despite being linked by a century-old act of courage. They spent the morning sharing family stories, laughing and crying in equal measure. Dorothy said softly, gesturing toward the exhibition, that her great-grandfather would have loved this. All his life he hoped someone would understand. Now thousands of people will. Patricia nodded, her eyes fixed on the mirror reflection. She was looking at her great-grandmother's face after all these years of wondering what she looked like, what she endured. Here she is, afraid and brave and about to be free. A young boy, perhaps 7, approached the photograph with his parents. He pointed at Samuel Williams and asked why he was looking over there instead of at the camera. His mother read the placard aloud, because he was watching over someone who needed help, someone who was hiding. He was very brave. The boy considered this carefully. Like a superhero, exactly like a superhero, his father replied. Except real. Sarah watched the family move through the exhibition, the boy asking questions at every display, absorbing the story of ordinary people who risked everything to do what was right. This, she thought, was why history mattered, not due. As dates and facts, but as proof of human courage, as evidence of what ordinary people could do when it mattered most. After its Philadelphia run, the exhibition traveled to Toronto, then to Washington, D.C., and onward to cities across North America where similar networks had once operated in secrecy. Rachel Martin's story and the Williams family's courage were preserved, studied, and celebrated. That evening after the gallery closed, Sarah stood alone before the Williams photograph. She thought about Samuel, 6 years old, guarding a secret that could have destroyed his family, about Rachel walking 90 miles toward freedom, trusting strangers with her life, about Thomas and Martha Williams opening their home despite the danger, about James Whitman using his art to protect people while documenting their humanity. And she thought about the photograph itself, how a simple family portrait taken in a moment of fear and courage had carried its secret for 157 years, waiting patiently for someone to see what little Samuel had seen. The truth hidden in a reflection, courage preserved in silver and light, a family's legacy finally understood. 3 years after the exhibition opened, Sarah received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "You helped me find my family." The sender was Marcus Williams, a 32-year-old software engineer from Seattle. He explained that he had visited the exhibition during its West Coast tour and recognized his surname. Following genealogical research, he traced his lineage back to Thomas Williams, Jr., Samuel's older brother in the photograph. He never knew, Marcus wrote. His father said they had roots in Philadelphia, but not the details. Learning that his ancestors risked everything to help others has changed how he sees himself, what he believes he's capable of. Sarah smiled as she read his message. This was the impact she had hoped for, not just preserving history, but making it alive, relevant, and personal, showing that courage and justice were not abstract ideals, but choices made by real people whose blood still flowed in living descendants. The exhibition sparked dozens of similar discoveries. Families across North America began researching their own histories, uncovering connections to the network Sarah had documented. Some found ancestors who had been helped, like Patricia. Others found ancestors who had helped, like Marcus. Each discovery added another thread to a growing tapestry of understanding. Dorothy Peterson passed away at 81, but before her death, she recorded an oral history that now played in the exhibition's final room. Her warm, steady voice told Samuel's story in her own words, ensuring his memories would endure, even after those who had heard them firsthand were gone. Patricia Morrison Chen wrote a book about Rachel Martin's life in Canada, using the photograph and Sarah's research as a starting point to explore what life had been like for Black refugees building new communities in Toronto. The book became required reading in Ontario schools. The photograph itself grew iconic, reproduced in textbooks, featured in documentaries, displayed in museums. Yet for Sarah, its power did not lie in its fame, but in what it represented, the truth that ordinary objects, when examined closely enough, can reveal extraordinary courage hidden just beneath the surface. She had built an entire career on that principle, helping other researchers and families uncover hidden narratives preserved inside old photographs. Yet the Williams family portrait remained unique, the case that taught her to look beyond what was obvious, to search for reflections, shadows, and the quiet evidence people left behind, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by accident. Along the margins, their recorded lives. On the anniversary of discovering Rachel Martin's reflection, July 23rd, the same date the photograph had been taken, 158 years earlier, Sarah returned to Philadelphia. She stood on Race Street, where the studio once operated, imagining that summer evening in 1868. The Williams family arriving after nightfall, children dressed in their finest clothes, hearts pounding with fear and resolve. She imagined Rachel Martin slipping in through the back entrance, moving quickly, hiding herself in shadow, while the family prepared to create their alibi. James Whitman setting up his camera, adjusting light, arranging fabric and posture with practiced care. and 6-year-old Samuel standing as still as his parents had instructed him, trying to be good, trying to be brave, yet unable to keep his eyes from drifting toward the person who mattered most in that room, the woman who had sung to him, the woman he had guarded, the woman his family was risking everything to save. In that moment of childhood honesty, Samuel had done something no one else could do. He had looked directly at the truth, and through that simple, instinctive act of looking, he had preserved it for future generations to find. Sarah thought about all the photographs still waiting quietly in archives and attics, in museum storage rooms and private collections. How many other stories were hidden in reflections and shadows? How many other Samuel Williamses had preserved truth through small unconscious acts of witness? History, she realized again, was not only what people chose to record openly. It was also what survived by chance, what lingered in the margins, what hid in the background until someone patient enough looked closely at what everyone else had overlooked. The past was not silent. It whispered, "If you knew how to listen." She pulled out her phone and took a photograph of the building where it had all begun. In the reflection of the cafe's glass window, she could see other people behind her on the street, walking, talking, laughing, living their ordinary lives. People just like the Williams family once had been. Ordinary people doing ordinary things until the moment arrived when they would have to decide whether to be extraordinary. Just like the Williams family, just like Rachel Martin, just like countless others whose courage, captured accidentally or deliberately in silver and light, waited patiently across time for someone willing to truly see it.